The following Profiles in Caring is brought to you by generous funding from Equitable Life and Casualty, committed to being the premier life and health insurer for the ultimate generation, today's senior American.
Welcome to our show, and thanks for joining us today. There are 80 million deaf people in developing countries around the world, and statistics show us that only 1% are actually taught by deaf teachers. Well, that's exactly where the nonprofit group Global Deaf Connection comes in. You see, the goal of GDC is to provide deaf students with scholarships so that they can go on to become teachers to the deaf community. Profiles in Caring correspondent Doug Jardine traveled to Kenya for an inside look at Global Deaf Connection in action.
Kimberly, welcome to the Nyandarua School for the Deaf, about a 2.5-hour drive north of Nairobi, and a chance to study the mission and focus of Global Deaf Connection. Their goal is to educate, through scholarships, deaf Kenyan students in the universities here, and then place them in schools just like this one. It is a chance to have a huge impact. One teacher, many students.
We really are an exceptional organization. There are no other organizations that do the work that we do, except for Global Deaf Connection. And what's most important and most unique is our support for putting deaf teachers in the classroom, working with deaf children. We strongly advocate for having deaf teachers in the classroom working with deaf children.
So very well stated in the most universal of languages, sign language. Global Deaf Connection, or GDC, has set the incredibly lofty goal of having a deaf person, college-trained and educated, placed as a teacher and educating students in all 41 deaf schools here in Kenya. And this historical process is taking place one classroom and one teacher at a time. Samuel Mureithi is the first deaf teacher ever at the Nyandarua School for the Deaf.
Me, when I came to this school and other students saw me as a teacher, as a deaf person who became a teacher, they were very surprised. I explained to them they also have to work hard, so in future they can become deaf teachers too.
Samuel was born with the ability to hear, but disease stole that ability at a very young age. He was placed in schools with hearing teachers who couldn't sign, so a positive learning environment was impossible. He felt left out and discriminated against. Now it is Samuel's goal to not only teach these deaf young students, but to convince them that with hard work they can be and achieve anything they want to, right in their home country of Kenya.
So can deaf people become whatever they want to be?
Can? Yes, of course, yes. There's only one problem, that in Kenya's society there's a lot of negative, a lot of negativity and especially negative attitudes. When they see someone who's disabled, they think this one is just a waste, just lost to us.
It is absolutely impossible to look at these faces and watch these dances and not know with a surety that these children, these deaf students, are brimming with self-confidence and hope for a brighter future, and they are out to get it for themselves with the help of organizations like Global Deaf Connection. For the first time in Kenya's history, once silent classrooms are now full of young students who can participate in the educational process, all because they are being taught by a deaf teacher. They are no different than you and me, except for the fact that they communicate in a manner you and I can't hear. So many parts of the world are accepting of that fact, but in many other parts and countries, like Kenya, being deaf led to years and years of isolation. And that is exactly what led Kevin Long to establish Global Deaf Connection.
I went to Kenya in 1996, and when I arrived, this deaf school had 150 deaf kids, about 10 hearing teachers, no one could sign. I asked this deaf girl one day, "What are you going to do when you grow up?" And she said, she signed to me, "I'm deaf." And then this girl signed to me, "Does America have deaf people?" And that's when I knew, not only does this deaf girl have no idea that she can become a teacher or do anything she wants to do, but she has no idea that the international deaf community, that there are deaf doctors, deaf actors, deaf politicians, she needs those role models. So that's how Global Deaf Connection was started.
There are 80 million deaf people living in developing countries around the world. Only about 10% receive any education, and only about 1% of those are actually taught in their own sign language. It is a situation that school administrators like headmaster here, Francis Magugwa, have dealt with and are learning to adapt to, all while they finally reach out and begin hiring deaf teachers.
I did not even think that a deaf teacher could be able even to teach the deaf, or it was very easy to get a deaf teacher. But now, because I have Mr. Morevi, I have found out that even deaf can be able to teach deaf children. According to what I have found, or according to what we have discovered, it's only that they are not hearing. Otherwise, other things they can do as well as a hearing person.
And it is exactly that evolution, not only in the school setting, but in Kenyan society as a whole, that helps Global Deaf Connection flourish here. And it is that slow but steady positive positioning that brings volunteers, just like Kara Christofferson, from the States to Kenya to help and advance the goals of GDC.
The thing that's most amazing is that the 2 deaf teachers that we observed that were teaching in the classrooms in Kenya, it was a natural skill. First of all, they're doing what they love, which is communicating in their native language, Kenya Sign Language, with a classroom full of deaf students for the first time are being able to get an education through their native language, which is Kenya Sign Language.
Each school had deaf children, over 200 deaf children. I mean, there's probably 8,000 deaf children in Kenya. And none of them at the time, 10 years ago, saw deaf teachers. Today, many of them can see a deaf teacher. We do have 8, which is much more than 0. So we're happy with the progress that we've made, but we're not finished yet. We still want to see more deaf teachers teaching in Kenya.
And that is exactly what is happening when Profiles in Caring returns, from the teachers teaching students to deaf teachers being taught and prepared for their careers in education.